Whiskey is one of those drinks that everyone has heard of, but few truly understand. Some people imagine it as strong, hard to drink, or even inaccessible. And then there are those who, after their first proper taste, discover a whole universe of honey, dried fruit, spices, chocolate and even smoke. So what is whiskey really? How is it made? And above all, what do all those complex terms on the labels mean? In this video we are starting from scratch. If you have never understood how whiskey works, or if you simply want to clear things up a bit, pour yourself a nice drop and listen. Let's get straight to the heart of the matter. First of all, whiskey is a grain spirit. The word distillate might sound complicated, but the concept is actually quite simple. It all starts with three basic ingredients: water, grains and yeast. Malted grains are ground and mixed with hot water. During this stage, the enzymes in the malt convert the starches into fermentable sugars. Yeast is then added, which converts these sugars into alcohol. The result is a sort of unhopped beer with a relatively low alcohol content. This liquid is then distilled in stills, traditionally made of copper, which allow the alcohol to be concentrated and the aromas destined for the final product to be selected. At this point, however, we still can't call it whiskey. The real star of the show enters the scene now: the cask. The distillate is transferred to wooden barrels, like this one, where it will remain for years. In many producing countries, the law establishes a minimum aging period. In Scotland, for example, a whiskey must age at least 3 years in oak casks. During this period, the wood slowly imparts color and aromas to the distillate, transforming a completely clear liquid into the characteristic amber color we all associate with whiskey. And that is precisely why maturation is one of the most important stages of the entire process. Without time and without the cask, whiskey as we know it simply would not exist. Of course, this is just the beginning. Every distillery interprets this process differently, but we will come back to that in a moment. Before we continue, let's answer a question that almost everyone asks when they first explore this word. Is it spelled whiskey or whiskey? The answer is simple. Both spellings are correct. In Scotland, Canada, Japan, India and most producing countries, you will almost always see whiskey without the E. In Ireland and the United States, however, it's traditional to use whiskey. This difference stems from historical and cultural reasons and has nothing to do with the quality of the product. In fact, the spelling whiskey was adopted in Ireland partly to distinguish its own spirit from the Scottish one. And this tradition later spread to the United States thanks to Irish immigrants. In other words, the extra E tells a piece of history. It doesn't make the whiskey any better or worse. Another thing you will discover very soon is that the country of origin helps define a whiskey style. It's not just about the climate or the raw materials, but also the traditions, production techniques and philosophy of each distillery. In general, Scotland offers an incredible variety of styles, from the most delicate and floral whiskies to intensely peated ones. Ireland is known for whiskies that are often smooth and elegant, though there is no shortage of spirits with a bold character. In the United States, bourbon and rye whiskey dominate, deeply rooted in the country's agricultural history and governed by very precise production rules. Japan, on the other hand, has built an extraordinary reputation by focusing on balance and technical precision. In recent years, countries such as India, Taiwan, France or Sweden have also emerged, each with its own interpretation of whiskey. India, for example, benefits from a very hot climate that accelerates maturation, while Taiwan has demonstrated that even a recent tradition can achieve exceptional levels of quality. It is precisely this diversity that makes whiskey so fascinating. Every bottle tells the story of the place where it comes from. And here we are at the part that probably causes the most confusion. When you pick up a bottle of whiskey, you will often see terms like single malt, blended Scotch whiskey or Kentucky straight bourbon. At first glance, they all seem to mean the same thing. In reality, each term provides a different piece of information. Some indicate how the whiskey was produced, others tell us where the whiskey was produced and what regulations it had to comply with. Let's start with the types. The category you will encounter most often here on the channel is single malt. A single malt is a whiskey made exclusively from malted barley and produced at a single distillery. Contrary to what many people think, the word single doesn't mean it comes from a single cask, but from a single distillery. It's the category I personally prefer and the one that over the years has given me the greatest enjoyment. That doesn't mean it's automatically better than others, but it's certainly one of the most popular categories among enthusiasts. Among the best known examples are Glenfiddich, The Glenlivet, Talisker and Lagavulin. Now let's move on to blended whiskies. As the name suggests, they are created by blending different whiskies, skillfully combining one or more malt whiskies with one or more grain whiskies. The goal is to achieve a balanced flavor profile. This category has played a fundamental role in the spread of whiskey around the world. Brands such as Johnnie Walker, Chivas Regal, Ballantine's and J&B belong to this family. In the United States, however, we find categories rooted in a completely different tradition. The most famous is undoubtedly Bourbon, which by law must be produced from a blend containing at least 51% of corn. Corn generally imparts a smoother, sweeter character, with notes of vanilla, caramel and spices. Alongside Bourbon is rye whiskey, where the predominant grain is, as the name suggests, rye. And then there is the renowned Tennessee whiskey, with its most famous representative Jack Daniels, very similar to Bourbon, but distinguished by an additional step. Before being transferred into barrels, the distillate is slowly filtered through a thick layer of maple charcoal. This process is known as the Lincoln County process and helps define the typical style of this category. Of course, the world of whiskey doesn't stop here. There are also categories such as single grain, single pot still Irish whiskey, blended malts, and many others. But to begin our journey, knowing these main ones is more than enough. At this point, however, one piece of the puzzle is still missing. The categories explain how a whiskey was produced. The designations, on the other hand, tell us where it was produced and which rules it had to follow. Let's take an example. Consider a bottle labeled Indian single malt whiskey. Single malt identifies the category. Whiskey simply tells us what type of spirit we are talking about. The same applies to a bottle labeled, for example, blended Scotch whiskey. In this case, blended identifies the category, while Scotch certifies that the whiskey was produced and aged in Scotland in accordance with Scottish regulations. Once you understand this system, reading a label becomes much easier. Every word is there for a reason and tells a piece of that whiskey's story. Why is every whiskey different? So far we have seen how whiskey is made and how to learn to recognize it. But there's still one question we need to answer. Two whiskies can be the same age, come from the same country, and even belong to the same category, yet have completely different aromas and flavors. One might evoke honey and vanilla, while another might bring to mind dried fruit, dark chocolate, or even peat smoke. How is this possible? The answer is simple. Whiskey is the result of countless choices. Each distillery approaches its craft differently, and every decision helps shape the character of the spirit. The type of grain matters, so does the duration of fermentation, which can encourage the development of fruitier and more complex aromas. The shape of the stills matters. Taller stills tend to produce more elegant and delicate spirits, while shorter ones generally yield richer and fuller-bodied whiskies. And then there's the cask. An ex-bourbon cask will often impart notes of vanilla, honey and caramel. An ex-sherry cask will offer more intense aromas such as dry fruits, raisins and spices. In recent years, many distilleries have also been experimenting with ex-port, ex-rum, ex-sauterne and many other wine or spirit casks, further expanding the range of possible aromas. Climate also plays an important role. A whiskey maturing on the coast of Scotland will experience very different conditions compared to one produced in India or Taiwan. Wet temperatures accelerate the maturation process. It is often said that the cask is the most important ingredient in whiskey. Technically, it isn't an ingredient, but it's hard to imagine a statement closer to the truth. It is precisely the interplay of all these variables that makes every whiskey unique. Whiskey is made from just a few ingredients, but it comes to life thanks to hundreds of small decisions. And that is exactly what makes every bottle different from all the others. Where to start? If you are just starting out and finding yourself standing in front of a shelf full of bottles, my advice is very simple. Don't immediately go for the pettiest whiskey, the one with the highest alcohol content or the most expensive bottle. At first, it's much more helpful to choose something well balanced, which will allow you to easily recognize the different aromas. An unpeated Scottish single malt can be an excellent starting point, as can a good blended whiskey known for its smoothness. The goal is to train your palate. Start by recognizing the various aromatic notes: vanilla, honey, citrus, caramel, nuts, and when the time is right, peat as well. If the alcohol seems a bit too intense at first, don't be afraid to add a few drops of water. Very often the aromas open up and the whiskey becomes even more enjoyable to explore. And above all, don't let yourself be overly influenced by rankings or reviews. The best whiskey isn't the one that others like the most. It's the one you like, because the beauty of whiskey isn't about finding the perfect bottle. It's about developing, one glass at a time, your own personal taste. And when the time comes to figure out how to best enjoy it, which glass to use, or at what temperature to serve it, I've already dedicated a full video to this topic. You can find it here on the channel. Whiskey can seem like a complicated word, but I hope this video has shown you that, in reality, it's much simpler than it seems. From now on, if you pick up a bottle, you won't just see a label anymore. You will see a story, the story of a place, of the people who created that whiskey, and of the time that has transformed it. Because whiskey, at least the way I experience it, isn't just a drink. It's a language that spans the centuries, a number thread that connects cultures, traditions, and people. Thank you for your attention and be well.